I now call upon the clerk of the court to read the charges against defendant number 2.
The second charge concerning comrades past, present and future in the Kericho and Bomet regions of Kenya. Defendant 1, Unilever, jointly and severally with defendant 2, the State of the Netherlands, is charged with committing crimes under section 3 of the Intergenerational Climate Crimes Act in the Kericho and Bomet regions of Kenya by engaging in the following activities. It is alleged inter alia that 1. The State of the Netherlands allowed Unilever to double up as a British corporation in the late 19th century by recognizing multinational corporations as a single legal entity, even when they are located in 2 different political jurisdictions with the sole purpose of benefiting from the British Empire. 2nd, as an ally of the United Kingdom, the State of the Netherlands colluded in confiscating land, everything beneath and above it, from the human and non-human residents of Kericho and Bomet with the sole purpose of handing over the seized lands to Unilever in their capacity as a legal person recognized by the State of the Netherlands. 3. The colonial land leases given to Unilever ended in 2009. That Unilever was required by the Kenyan state to produce their land leases for verification, and that Unilever has failed to comply with the directions of the state of Kenya, and that the State of the Netherlands has taken no measures whatsoever to direct Unilever to comply with the directions of the state of Kenya. 4. Acting under corporate laws established by the State of the Netherlands, Unilever split itself into 2 legal entities, Unilever and Brook Bond, so as to avoid the directions of the State of Kenya for verification of land leases and the claims for restoration of the lands to the people of Kericho and Bomet, illegally seized by the United Kingdom during the colonial era. 5. The State of the Netherlands took no actions against the United Kingdom for failure of Unilever to return the lands confiscated by the United Kingdom's British Empire. 6. Unilever established tea plantations on the land confiscated from the people of Kericho and Bomet for the sole purpose of making profits from trading in tea around the world for the benefit of its shareholders and the State of the Netherlands. 7. Unilever introduced mechanization on the plantations which has destroyed livelihood, ecology and health of humans and non-humans in Kericho and Bomet with lasting impacts on future generations as defined in Section 2, Article 3 of the Intergenerational Climate Crimes Act. Unilever knowingly used Roundup, a deadly poisonous fertilizer that has caused extensive damage to the health and well-being of humans and non-humans of Kericho and Bomet. 9. Unilever used aerial spraying on the plantations established on confiscated land, which has resulted in permanent damage to the ecosystems of Kericho and Bomet. 10. Unilever continuously rationalized its management practices to deprive people of Kericho and Bomet of their livelihoods with the intention of making profits for its shareholders and the State of the Netherlands. These activities, if proved to be true, constitute intergenerational climate crimes against past, present and future generations of humans, non-humans, cultures and ecosystems in the Kericho and Bomet regions of Kenya under Section 3 of the Intergenerational Climate Crimes Act.
Thank you. I will now call upon the witness to give their evidence in support of these charges. We have with us today Faith Alubbe, who is Chief Executive Director of the organization Kenya Land Alliance, who is present here in person. On the request of the witness, we will first view a 15-minute evidentiary video before she addresses this court directly. We also acknowledge the contributions of Ogina Hilary K. Odne of the Kenya Land Alliance. Over to you, Faith.
Head, or I steward an organization called Kenya Land Alliance, who supports communities in Kericho and Bomet, communities that were violently evicted during the colonial period to pave way for the installation of a Unilever plantation to make money. And since 1902, Unilever has been in those counties. Maybe we can play the video before I continue with my submissions. Thank you very much.
Unilever is one of the multinational companies in Kericho and Bomet. In fact, Unilever's leases expired in 2009, the colonial leases, and they seem to have been renewed irregularly. The National Land Commission had recommended that these leases be renewed in consultation with the county governments. But at the moment, these multinationals do not even want to produce their leases for verification, despite the governor of Kericho having inquired for them. The leases were given to Brookbond, which is a separate legal entity, but somehow it mutated to Unilever, which is a separate legal entity. So you'll find like Unilever is operating a lease that belongs to a different legal entity.
I'm a farmer doing some small businesses and assisting people in day-to-day life, especially our children now. They are going to university, no scholarship, no what, no nothing. That is why we are being forced to see to it that we get back our land.
Wazazi wangu walisaliwa hapa, sasa hata mimi sasa nikasaliwa hapa, ambapo sasa tumekuja, tumesoma, tukafika form 4. Kidogo kidogo tulikuwa tunaajiriwa kazi hapa Unilever. Ulikuwa unaajiriwa, unafanya kazi 6 months, unasimamishwa. Unakaa karibu 1 month, tena unarudi unafanya kazi. Sasa ikafika time nimekuja nimenunua pikipiki. Ambapo hii kazi ilikuwa ni muhimu sana. Na ilikuwa nalisha watoto wangu. Alafu ilikanga mzuri. Alafu ikafika 2018, sasa kazi sasa ikakuja chini.
Historical land injustices. It is rampant in Kipsigis land, especially Kericho and Bomet. Because of the colonial, they come and occupy our land forcefully, no transaction. They use force to evict the original people. And there is no benefit since then up to now. Our forefathers, our fathers, likewise to me, we are slaves kwa hii shamba ya wazungu ambaye walitunyang'anya. Hatukukuwa tumeongea.
The land securities of these communities, the changing land tenure regimes, specifically around the areas of Unilever that spans across about 4 counties living in these areas, are still outstanding issues. And we have been made aware that the activities of the company are having adverse impacts on the environment and indeed overall on issues that pertain to climate change.
Kwa Unilever hapo awali nilikuwa nikifanya kazi pale. Kabla hii makanis kuja ama matinga kuingia, tulikuwa tukifanya kazi vyema sana. Tulikuwa tukiachiriwa every month watu not less than 300. Lakini tangu hizo machine sikuje, hiyo kazi imechukuliwa na machine na inafanywa kwa siku moja.
Sasa ikakuja ika-affect ikasi yetu sasa za bodaboda juu. Hapo mbeleni watu walikuwa wanapokea, unapeleka Ngaina Road, unarudisha, unashika kutoka hapo unapeleka Jangoi, unashika hapo unapeleka Kapset. Na watu wa matuka hapa sasa walikuwa na benefit. Watu wa wholesale walikuwa wanatuma twende Kericho. Sasa wakiona sasa mshahara inaingia. Sasa ikafika time sasa saa hii hakuna ni flat, hata saa hii nimeandika 30 bob tangu asubuhi. Sasa hiyo ikagua changamoto sasa kwa hii kazi yetu. Na si changamoto kwa hii kazi yetu ya bodaboda peke yake.
Mambo ya pesa hazipo, ina affect kila mtu. Kwa sababu unakuta pengine kwa kampuni moja kama ya Unilever ina my estate karibu 25. Zilikuwa na managers hapo awali 25. Lakini kwa hivi sasa manager mmoja anachukua eneo ya estate 5. Kwa hivyo hao watu wengine wameenda nyumbani. Na wafanyikazi pia wamepungua. Saa hizi ni machine. Sasa unaona pesa circulation hazipo katika hii sehemu yetu. Pili, hapo awali kwa sababu mambo ya employment ilikuwa juu. Watu wameajiriwa. Pesa zinakuwa nyingi kwa mifuko na iko kwa circulation. Lakini kwa hivi sasa hizo pesa zimeenda kwa mfuko mmoja. Hiyo ni kwa binafsi wa kampuni.
Hata mimi niko na watoto. Hapo mbeleni walikuwa wanasoma Shine Academy, mwingine alikuwa anasoma Ebenezer Academy. Fees haikuwa shida kwangu. Juu nilikuwa natoka asubuhi na pepa watu wanaenda kazi. Saa 10 mimi naendea hao. Sasa ambapo saa hii hawa watu sasa hawako kwa kazini. Sasa ikanilazimisha sasa nimetoka kutoka private school wakakuja wakaenda public school.
The perception here now is that there's a disconnect that is there before. Remember, my father used to work in Unilever a long time ago. He was a plumber. It was called that time Brookpond Kenya Limited. Now, with the advent of technology and security issues, most locals now cannot access the estate, even the operators, to go and relax. So that has brought disconnect because people no longer feel like they are part of this community because there are restrictions to access the beautiful scene in the Unilever section. We've seen they are using also private security companies who are more stricter than before. So the community feels they have not been impressed like before. There was freedom initially, but nowadays there's more like Unilever looks like they are putting a wall, some kind of a barrier with the locals. So locals don't feel a sense of belonging of this Unilever company anymore because of those issues. If that can be addressed moving forward, the community will feel like Unilever is part of us.
Ukiangalia mambo ya climate change, kwa sababu tunaenda mambo ya machine, si sana watu watashughulika na kuangalia mambo ya mazingira. Mechanization ni kupata profit ya hali ya juu na uwezi ukaangalia huyu jirani vile anaishi. Kwa hivyo utaona ya kwamba mazingira ama climate itakuwa affected in one way or another because hakuna watu sasa wanaangalia tutapanda miti hapa tutafanya nini. Hiyo kazi itazimwa kwa sababu mtu anataka kufanya nini? Kufanya hiyo kazi yake ya kupata profit. Kuna hii dawa wanatumia kwa kuchoma hiyo Roundup kadhalika, hiyo inaleta shida. Hata ndio unaona hii sehemu yetu ina mambo ya kansa kwa hali ya juu.
Kwa hiyo mambo ya kuiweka mbolea kwa majani chai na hizo zingine, kuna zingine inasprayiwa, imetu affect sana kwa sababu ndege inamwaga kutoka angani. So ikimwagwa kutoka angani wa upepo pia inasukuma kuenda kwa maji, ambayo maji tunatumia kunywa. Maji ninapooga huko unapata za zingine unapata ukioga kosi hairudi normal vile ulikuwa. Ukienda kukunywa huwa unapata shida ya tumbo, mara tumbo kunguruma kwa sababu ya mbolea yenye imemwagwa kwa maji na chemicals.
Area kama hii wakati vijana walikosa ajira, mambo ya uhalifu imeongezeka. Na hasa wakati wa usiku tunaona kuna changamoto hata kwa usafiri wetu ya pande hii.
Kwa hizo machines yenye zimeingia sasa hii, watu wamelalamika wakisema wananyanyaswa sana. Kazi ambayo walikuwa wakifanya umenyang'anywa, na kusema pia bei ambayo wanachunia hiyo chai kwa sasa hii ya makazi iko chini sana. Hasara ambayo imeingia kwa sasa hii, vijana wetu hawaachiliwi kazi tena. Mimi kama mama pengine ningekuwa nikamua maziwa nikipeleka huko ninapata riziki ya siku. Sasa hii hakuna.
Hapo sasa ime affect biashara yetu. Na hatujui sasa mbele, unajua sasa sisi ni vijana. Sasa hii niko na 30 years, niko na watoto wawili. Hao watoto wakigrow watakuja wanaenda wapi? Juu hakuna makazi sasa hii hapa. Kitambo ifike 50 years hao watoto wangu nitakuwa ndalisha na nini?
Njia ya kwenda mbele hii kampuni wangefanya kwanza kile wanaita public participation kwa kile wanataka kufanya, kwa sababu sisi ni majirani, na tusisahau ya kwamba haya mashamba ni yetu na yatabaki kuwa yetu. Kwa hivyo ili tupate mwelekeo ya kwenda mbele, nafikiri kwa hivi sasa, kwa sababu hawakutujulisha ya kwamba wanaleta machine, nafikiri njia moja ni hawa kupatiwa notice, na hata tumesema katika hiki kijiji chetu ya kwamba tumewapa notice ya siku 14 watoe hizo machine ili ndio tuanze pamoja.
Kulingana na mafikirio yangu kama mkaachi wa area hii ya Bomet na Kericho, ingekuwa mzuri tinga itolewe kwa machani chai wakati hii tinga ilipoletwe, sisi tungepidi tutoe response kama jamii, hata hatukuchulishwa. Lakini wakati imekesha kwenye mashamba hizi tumeona madhara na inabidi itolewe haraka iwezekanavyo.
Kulingana na mababu zetu walikuwa wakiishi kwa hizo mashamba ya wasungu saa hii, na walifuruswa wakifukuzwa na wasungu wakapanda chai. So hatujui vile kama walinunua ama kama ni contract, mbona hii contract iishi. Hizi machines siende turudi tufanye kazi vile tulikuwa tukifanya awali, ama waturudishie mashamba yetu, kwa sababu mashamba ni yetu ya Wakalenjin na tupate faida kwa hiyo mashamba sasa.
We are calling upon the government of Kenya and the government of London to see to it that they have to get rid of harvesting machines. Let people work manually when they are harvesting tea. If nothing is going to happen, we are going to use force to see to it that we get rid of these machines. It is better for me to die than to live and see poverty, impoverished, brought by colonial people.
The county government has done, I think, substantial something through what the government initiated. What I do not agree with the government here is that they have not been able to engage Unilever directly over the issue because the Kenyan Constitution calls for dialogue and public participation. And as far as I'm concerned, it was not done thoroughly. Number two is that the Unilever company has also not been able to become forthright and address this issue or even give a report to the locals here, because the people who are supposed to be compensated are people who live here in Kericho and they're here. So Unilever ought to have done something beyond a press statement that they have issued before. They should be able to enumerate and give details on their part and convene a meeting with the locals of Kericho and be able to demonstrate what they have done or to remove the blame from themselves. Lastly, the national government, the lands ministry, has also been a lame duck, in my own view. They have not been able to bring all the stakeholders, because in this case, I would expect the national government to bring on board Unilever, the county government, and all the stakeholders on a platform and address this issue from an informed perspective.
Kenya Land Alliance is an organization that brings together non-state actors that work on land. Land is defined under Article 260 of our Constitution, where we define land as what is beneath the surface. Land is what is on the surface that we walk on, and land is what is in the air, like renewable energy, like wind power, solar. That is land. And that is also natural resources. Article 60 to Article 70 of our Constitution just talk about land justice in Kenya and the environment. And then we have the human rights angle of the whole discussion should not be ignored. We should not put barriers like time limitation or the issue of jurisdiction or the issue of the constitutional amendments that the British handed the Kenyan government over to Kenyans in 1964. Thus, they are not responsible, or their liability does not fall with the British government when you're talking about remedy and the communities that are around Unilever. Those are not some of the bottlenecks that should be even brought up, because these communities suffered injustices. They still suffer injustice. And the injustice that they suffered during the colonial era still affects them to date. Those are some of the issues that should be addressed. Land justice should not be a far-fetched idea for these communities that were violently discriminated against. They were ill-treated and evicted in a cruel manner when they did not know the value of their land to the colonial administrator. The way forward. Inclusion of communities in policy-making processes is very important so that communities can own the discussion. Dissemination of correct information, because Kenya, we have several policy frameworks. We have the Constitution, Article 35, that talks about rights to information. And we have a subsequent enabling law, Access to Information Act 2016, that provides that public information should be availed to communities so that they can be part of the process. Government institutions, duty bearers in this context, should be able to support communities to understand the discourse. But when the communities are always receiving the short end of the stick, we cannot expect them not to be disgruntled. So the issue of the communities that live around Unilever can also be addressed with the setup of multi-stakeholder forums, because a multi-stakeholder forum then will bring together all the actors and everybody will be able to ask questions in a timely manner and receive good responses that would then satisfy the community, and the company can be able to work. There's need for justice for these communities. That is something that the national government cannot run away from. That is something that the British government cannot run away from. It should be addressed. It's timely for that question to be addressed. How do we ensure that these communities access justice? Collaboratively, it will be easy for us to support these communities to get land justice. Collaboratively in this instance means the investor, who is in Unilever, who is gaining raising profits from the land that these communities feel dispossessed. The government of Kenya, the county government, and non-state actors like Kenya Land Alliance, we should work together, support the communities to be able to realize justice. Thank you very much. As the video has introduced the subject matter, I'd just like to point out the various brands of tea that Unilever produces. If you see on the supermarket shelves, the brand Lipton's, PG Tips, and Pure Leaf, those are brands of Unilever. Unilever is making money out of the sweat, the blood of the generation of Kenyan workers that have never had an opportunity to negotiate on equal footing with Unilever. Unilever is a colonial era company that was given land and was a beneficiary of a government policy called the Land Alienation Policy. And just to give you a glimpse of the history, so that you know Unilever is a small government unto itself, the Land Alienation Policy was a sterile term used by the British during the colonial era. And as the prosecutor pointed out earlier before, the government of Britain and the government of Netherlands colluded to make money out of the Kenyan soil through policies and through technical processes that lay people back in Kericho and Bomet cannot understand. So these white settlers developed a law they called the Land Acquisition Act of 1894, which gave settlers like Unilever land for at least 21 years. As if that was not enough, they enacted another law which they called the Crown Lands Ordinance Law in 1902, which provided such companies with 99-year leases. As if that was not enough, there was another law that was passed in 1915 that provided such companies with 1,000-year leases. So as we speak, these leases expired in 2009. The National Land Commission, as has been mentioned, which is a government body, ruled that those leases should be made public. Unilever, as a small government as it is, has breached that ruling, and nothing has been done to it. And the Dutch state should be able to comply with what it stands for. It stands for the rule of law. It stands for transparency and accountability. It stands for respect to the people of Kericho and Bomet. It should compel Unilever to comply with the ruling from the government agency. This case was presented by the county of Kericho to the Special Rapporteur, United Nations Special Rapporteur on promotion of truth, justice, reparation, and guarantee of non-repetition in Geneva. And the ruling that resulted from that process also addressed the government of the UK, British government, and the Dutch government. And there was no response. So in 2015, as late as 2015, the Dutch government has been addressed by legal processes, and yet there's still a breach as late as 2015. When you're talking about historical land injustices that has been mentioned there, the people of Kericho and Bomet are still displaced. 200,000 hectares of their land was given to Unilever back in 1902. Up to 2021, they derive no benefit from that land. There is no form of social legitimacy. There is no form of community benefit sharing from their land. There is no form of CSR that Unilever can actually say that we make this amount of money, so we'd like to invest back to the community. Just to give you a rough idea, 40 kilograms of hand-picked tea, 40 kilograms of hand-picked tea. Such a person who handpicks that tea is paid $9,800 per week. That's not even $100 per week. It's less than $100. So in essence, this worker, especially women, wake up, go work in the Unilever plantations, and are paid less than $100 per week. As we speak, there's militarization of the Unilever plantations. You've heard that the private security are harsh. That is militarization. Their security determine who passes and who goes where, thus closing the access roads. That's a control mechanism of the locals. That was also the system that was used by apartheid in South Africa. So as we speak, these local private security that are not even trained well, they're given only one order: control the natives. Yes, in 2021 we're being still called the natives. The violence that one of the speakers spoken about, that is the frustrated voice of community members who feel that their people, their ancestors were forcefully evicted from their lands and territories and displaced and taken like maybe 800 miles away in order for the alienated land to be given to an investor. In 1902 and in 2021, this investor is still determining how they'll run their lives. That is more than a century later. As we speak, the issue of access to information is still very rife. The county government of Kericho has attempted to go to court, but the national level mechanisms have failed. Unilever breaches them, blatantly breaches these processes, national processes, and the rule of law. And the Dutch government is aware. Why isn't the Dutch government holding Unilever accountable? Why isn't the Dutch government pointing out and calling them out and asking them why are they making money through unfair trade practices? The issue of environmental justice that have been pointed out by one of the speakers. Generations will be affected by that act. We do not have capacity to assess the effect of such injustices on the coming generation. But for sure, those chemicals that are being washed into their lands, those chemicals that they are breathing, those chemicals that they are eating in their food will affect them for a very long time to come. Do we have capacity to assess the impact? No. Is the government willing to do it? No mention of that. Why can't the Dutch government spearhead that and say one of our companies that is operating in this poor location is causing harm? Why don't we find out the human cost of their operations? As I conclude, employment issues. These workers that work in these plantations live in colonial era 10 by 10 huts. 10 by 10 huts. Let me repeat that. So if you're living in a 10 by 10 hut in 2021, you have a family, your forefathers lived in those huts. So it's being inherited from generation to generation. So this issue of them advocating for transparency and accountability at this level, with macro level documents that speak macro level language. And these people in these communities do not even understand those technical processes that Unilever is putting on their website. How are these people supposed to demand for justice from such a big giant that is very organized, rich, with deep pockets? Is it fair? Is it fair for communities to confront such a giant without the Dutch government playing a role? As I conclude, is it important for communities to be included in government, in development processes that are happening in their locality? If it is important, then the Dutch government should insist on inclusion and public participation. It is in our laws, but it is clear that national level laws are not functional for such a big corporation. It is breaching, blatantly breaching. Inclusion is important, and the Dutch government should insist on that as a bare minimum, that people who are affected by a policy, people who are affected by an installation should have a say. Social legitimacy is an irreducible minimum. They say that that community might not survive without that investment. It's a lie. Were they dying before Unilever set up the tea plantations in Kericho and Bomet? Were they dying? Were they starving? Why would Unilever cause such harm and the Dutch government just keeps quiet and watches? Where is the need for human rights? Why should we advocate for human rights in certain spaces and not in certain spaces? Are there people who are qualified to be considered and some are not considered? Because anyway, they were forcefully evicted during colonial era and you're making money, and so what are we talking about? Lastly, the issue of licensing of Unilever products when they're exported abroad. They're making money. Institutions like the ETI are licensing their produce. Where is their corporate fiduciary duty for such institutions that license such products? They should not be part of the blood and sweat and toil and tears of generations of the Kenyan workers in Kericho and Bomet. Thank you very much for hearing. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement, Faith, and thank you for the very detailed comments that you made on the film and the reality in Kericho and Bomet. I will now ask Nicholas Hildyard, Sharon Wen, Resigan, do you have any questions? Yeah, Resigan?
So thank you very much. Oops, sorry. You see, the machines trouble us all the time. Thank you very much, Faith, for that presentation, also for sharing the details that you did. There's something that you mentioned in your initial comments and that were carried through in the presentation, and it's this idea of given land. You know, the verb there is the given part. So I want to, if you don't mind, just focus a little bit on that. Yeah? Kenya's achieved independence in '63, became a republic in '64, and I remember a slogan that was chanted, "Not yet Uhuru." For the people of Kenya, and the people of Africa as a whole, when is freedom? Because if things are being given, there's an assumption that those giving have the power to give it. And so I want to question as well, because you mentioned various laws that spread over a century, now more than a century. And how is it that those laws that were shaped not for the advancement of Africa continue to be enforced now by Africans, by ourselves? Is there something that we need to account for? Very much as you referred to the responsibility of the Dutch government in managing and policing its institutions. But there's a strong sense as well that our own national governments from Africa have a responsibility to act on behalf of African people and not the profit-seeking activities that you refer to. So if you would share with us just a little bit about this, the various laws passed since 1964, by whom and for whom? Because none of the historically unjust laws seem to have been removed. These are odious laws that continue. And is it not time that those were ended? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your questions. I'd just like to say that when I use the term given, they were given because the locals, or what they were called the natives, were forced into reserves. And these reserves were controlled environments which the colonial administration made sure they are there by introducing tax, hard tax, so that someone had to work in order to pay tax. And the only available place to work were the plantations. So they violently, arbitrarily evicted communities, almost 100,000 communities. In fact, there is a massacre called the Sotik massacre of 1905, which no one has ever been compensated for. No, it's never even been mentioned. There's like a systematic or deliberate effort to suppress that piece of history, that people were massacred in order to pave way for the installation of such a multinational. So this land was given to Unilever. The native was weak. The native was not even in a position to negotiate and understand the economic side of their land. The local communities could not negotiate. So it was not a negotiation. It was not a trade agreement, as they want to hide behind being a legal identity and hide behind bilateral agreements. Bilateral agreements by whom, for whom, how? If they want us to understand the bilateral agreements, then let's go back to 1902, the educators, so that we can negotiate on the same level. That didn't happen, and it's not happening, as late as 2009, as late as 2015. The issue of freedom and liberty. Since 1922 in my country, Kenya, we have been agitating. They were liberation movements that started in 1920, led by people like Hari Duku, who were part of the LEGCO, groups like the Mau Mau, groups like the Koitalele Rap Samoei groups, Mekatilili Waminze. Those groups went to the bush to fight for two things: land and freedom. But if you look at 2021, when someone is being subjected to what Unilever is subjecting the people of Kericho and Bomet, you start asking yourself, do they have land? No. Do they have freedom? If Unilever determines the employment terms, determines when they can move, determines the money in their pockets, determines what happens to their land and territories, determines which school their children go to, is there liberty? Is there freedom? No. So for some Kenyans, like in those two counties, it's not yet Uhuru. Uhuru is freedom in Swahili. Then these laws that we have, very beautiful pieces of legislation, but enforcement is still a challenge. Enforcement is still a challenge because, number one, there's the issue of multiplicity of laws. So many laws affecting one issue. Lay people cannot read across the laws to demand their entitlements. There's the issue of these laws being guided by colonial legacies, because the big brothers are still in Kenya. The big brothers are still in Kenya. When I say big brothers, I say the colonial administrators still influence the way we look at our country, the way we implement our laws, the way our political issues are handled. They are still there. And it's a shame that they advocate for this, you know, these high principles and, you know, in their spaces. But what about the spaces that they can influence and cause a difference? So we have laws, but enforcement is being challenged by high illiteracy among us, the lay people, awareness, lack of awareness of the right holders to demand from the duty bearers, and poor enforcement. Yes, thank you.
Was there any other question from here?
Thank you, Faith, for that very moving testimony, and also for your comrades for the film. I had one question. You mentioned that there were obstacles to being able to achieve justice in this legal in the legal forums, which may be different from justice in a wider moral sense. And one of these was limitations on time, and the other was issues of jurisdiction. And I wondered whether you could just flesh that out a bit and just give some examples about how the law has been framed in a way that actually denies you justice.
Thank you very much for your question. Thank you very much. In terms of limitation, when we wrote to the British administration, they indicated that in 1964 they handed over the country to the new administration. Through the constitutional amendment of 1964, then the Kenyan administration took over the assets and liabilities, which is not true, because those companies still enjoy leases that were given in the 1920s. So you can't make money off land, but when it comes to the issue of limitation, you want to point out that you already left the country and you're still plundering that country. So the issue of limitation cannot apply. Then the land alienation is a form of cleansing. It's genocide. It's a crime against humanity. It cannot be limited by time, so we cannot talk about time lapse. The issue of jurisdiction, even if they handed over the state to the current administration, it was a colonial policy to alienate land and accommodate these multinationals like Unilever. So why is it that when it comes to money, it hides behind being a legal entity? We were given land legally. We operate legally. But when we demand for accountability in terms of jurisdiction, they start hiding behind the fact that, we do not have jurisdiction. It was a colonial era legacy. So as we speak, we say that they have jurisdiction, the British and the Dutch government. Limitation of time cannot apply to crimes against humanity, which they are doing to the people of Kericho and Bomet.
Thank you, Faith. I have one very short clarification to ask you arising from the film. I think there was mention of use of Roundup, which is a pesticide, and aerial spraying of Roundup, which has destroyed large areas and affected people's health. Roundup was recently sued in the US and found to be guilty of using poisonous substance, etc. I'm wondering, following the US litigation against Roundup, is there any move in Kericho or Bomet to try and get Unilever to stop the practice of using Roundup?
Thank you very much for your question. Kenya Land Alliance has linked up together with other actors in Britain and in the US to try and hold Unilever accountable. We are in the process of doing that. And as you heard the lady mention, even them, they do not understand the generational effect of using such a poisonous pesticide. So we are hoping that the actions, joint actions that we are engaged in as Kenya Land Alliance would be able, and the community representatives will be able to bear fruits. We have done 2 demonstrations. We did one in UK in front of the Unilever headquarters, which I can disappointingly say, in front of the headquarters you find pictures of naked Africans, and they call that artwork. And then the second demonstration was in the plantations where Unilever has plantations. So we hope that the collaborative efforts that we are having with our partners at regional and international level would be able then to bring that out and link our struggles. Yes.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the jury? Yes.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I was wondering, in your testimony, your verbal testimony, it seems very clear that you would like Unilever to leave the lands and to return them to the people in the localities. But in the video testimony, it seemed there was some dispute about that, in the sense that some of the people speaking wanted to just have Unilever remove the machines, the mechanization of their operations, and then return to the old situation, and some of them want them to leave Unilever altogether. So as a jury member, I was wondering, if we decide Unilever to be guilty, it will be dissolved according to the act the act that was introduced at the beginning of these proceedings. So I was wondering, would that do justice to what the people of the locality who work together with Unilever now want?
Thank you very much for your question. I'd like you to imagine what the communities are going through ever since they were born. It's Unilever that gives them employment. It's Unilever that gives them money for them to take their children to school. It's like Unilever has become like the center of their lives. So some of them feel if they remove the machines and they go back to the terms that they had before the machines, their life would be okay. But will they be okay? Their lives wouldn't be okay. We are saying even if they are investing in Kericho, they should adhere to the laws that they propagate. They should have public participation so that the communities can engage with the processes that they are putting in place. We are saying that the community should determine if they want that investment or that installation in their community land. The fact that their leases are over, they should go back to the community to get social legitimacy. So either way, the community should have a say. Community-led efforts should be the vital, the sun around this conversation. But when they are not engaged in their own language, in their own spaces, there's bound to be issues. There's bound to be contradictions. Because even them, they've been trained and their attitudes not to see beyond Unilever, which is wrong. They should be given a voice.
My question is for you. What are your thoughts on having to do the proceedings in a historically European environment?
This is the best environment because it is important for the people, for the Dutch people, to understand what some of the corporations that represent the Dutch are doing in third world countries like Kenya. We are seeking solidarity with the Dutch people for them to hold their government accountable. You should hold your government accountable. We believe that you have a say here because what they stand for is better represented here. People in Kericho and Bomet do not have a say as compared to the citizens who can hold their government accountable here. We are seeking solidarity. We are seeking your voices to induct the Dutch government over their commission and omission. They ignore the injustices that the people of Kericho and Bomet go through, yet they have the power to control that and stop it.
Oh, yeah, there, yes.
Thank you. I have a very simple question, actually. So a lease, actually, that's a transaction. What is the return that they give, Unilever?
Nothing. You've heard in the video that there is no CSR, there is no community benefit sharing mechanism. So in essence, they exist because they were given a lease in 1902. So in the video, you've not seen us point out there is a school or a road or hospital built by Unilever to benefit locals, or there is a community benefit sharing where we are saying you make 10 shillings, then later 50 cents go back to the community and maybe develop their skill. As you've seen, most of the communities are unskilled laborers. So there is no even skill transfer. Not that we can point out.
There, behind you.
This is just a comment and maybe a thought. I was just wondering if there's any use in bringing in legal mechanisms such as the transboundary agreements that could come from other country governments to also bring these corporations to account as well, to put on more pressure as well.
Yes, it's quite important. That's why we are partnering with other organizations at regional and international level, and it's ongoing. We are hoping that those efforts will bear fruit, and the people of Kericho and Bomet would access some remedy.
Hello, thank you. You mentioned that the the tea from these plantations also supplies PG Tips and other brands through Unilever. And I was just wondering, how much control do these smaller brands have over their sources as legal entities in their own right? And how much agency do they have over their source, or are they even aware of this?
Those brands that I mentioned are Unilever brands. So it is their produce. But we partake of them maybe without knowledge that these brands are being produced through unfair trade practices. So Unilever has the power to change their policies and to practice, not only change, practice the policies that they stand for in their websites where communities cannot really access and understand. So it is their brands. That's why we are saying the licensing body, ETI, should also follow up and find out what are the unfair practices that are being put in place by Unilever as they seek to make money and plunder the counties of Kericho and Bomet without fair and inclusivity of the locals. Are the locals informed how much money is being made by Unilever abroad through their brands? They are not informed and they don't benefit. Yeah.
Faith, if I may ask a question here, which I think follows from one of the questions from the jury here about the land leases. You mentioned that these leases were given in 1902 and that they have continued. I mean, I was wondering if you could explain a little bit on the terms of the lease. Were these what in English law we call leases in perpetuity? So a lease is given for a very long time. Were these like one of those 999-year leases, or were these, what kind of leases were these leases that were given to the company? And what happened to those leases after independence in 1964? So if you can just highlight, because that's a very central issue in these proceedings.
The details of the leases are not public information. And accessing those leases, you cannot even know where to start. The government itself put in place a task force to investigate those leases, and we've never seen that report. It tells you of the corporate impunity that is going on in that sector. We do not have details of those leases. We know that the legal transaction between the government and Unilever is a lease, but we don't have details. And the fact that Unilever leases expired in 2009 and the National Land Commission, a government agency, ruled that that land should revert back to community, and it has not still happened, points to just blatant breach of the law. How is that possible? It's being abetted by governments like the British government, the Kenyan government, the Dutch government, because there is a breach. So we do not have details of those leases. What we know, if a lease runs from 1902 to 2009 to 2009, that is almost 1,000 years. So we have no details. It is not public information.
Okay, thank you.